Pikmin is one of the strangest franchises Nintendo has right now. They've kept it around even though it's never really sold the best, despite the fact that it should, but I can understand why. It's kind of a weird game. It follows the adventure of Captain Olimar, who crashes on a strange foreign planet and needs to use the indigenous Pikmin, an army of weird little creatures, to solve puzzles, defeat enemies, explore terrain, and recover parts of Olimar's broken down ship. Looking at gameplay, it can be really hard to tell what this game even is. And it can be a daunting game too, with little guidance on how to take on a seemingly enormous world, and especially with a 30-day time limit before the oxygen of this world poisons Olimar to death and his life support runs out. And if you haven't collected at least all the strictly necessary ship parts by then, you just lose. You can rewind days if you know a particular one was bad, but for some that can be just plain tedious. The game also brings quite a challenge in combat for people not familiar with real-time strategy games, needing precise aiming and a snappy reaction time to deal with some of the most unpredictable threats and unforeseen disasters and crises you've ever seen. But from other perspectives, this unseen and bizarre formula for a game is exactly what makes it so special. The challenge can be something to love too. I, for example, did struggle playing this game for the first time, so I actually went to Pikmin 3 first, which is an easier and more polished game, especially simply due to not having that time limit that freaked me out with this game. But now coming back to where the series started, I want to talk a bit about what this game specifically has to offer and the good that it does, and how all the evolutions we got later in the franchise got their start. The main reason I stuck with the series was just because I endured years of Arlo's Pikmin propaganda, but I never outright dismissed it because I could tell that he was onto something with this game. But now that we're in an age of the internet having this power to promote and spread word of mouth about new releases, I thought I'd show you all why Pikmin is worth giving a shot, going through each of the main games so far, whether you just listen to me talk about them as I go through the whole game bit by bit, or are suddenly convinced to play it yourself at a certain point through this video. So let's rewind a bit for some context. The era of the Nintendo GameCube was a strange one. By no means was this a best-selling console, but the GameCube launched some killer IPs and franchises in the early 2000s, and hosted some of the best and most beloved entries in established series. Animal Crossing, Luigi's Mansion, Metroid Prime, and of course Pikmin debuted. We got Smash Bros. Melee, Zelda Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, Mario Sunshine, Mario Kart Double Dash, Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door. It was a crazy time for quality Nintendo stuff. But unfortunately, Pikmin from its very inception has been doomed to lay on these less successful Nintendo consoles, getting its start on GameCube in 2001, and a sequel in 2004, then another sequel in 2013, on the Wii U. The only real Nintendo console to perform worse than the GameCube. So, Shigeru Miyamoto, creator of Donkey Kong, Mario, Zelda, Star Fox, decided he was going to be a little bit of a goofball and take acid or something one day, so then these little shits came to him in his dreams screaming all sorts of gobbledygoo, and so he birthed their physical form. Jokes aside, how did this idea even come into existence? The idea of commanding a little army more so evolved over development time, with the idea initially starting of watching a world of two primitive people, but Miyamoto wanted more, so villagers formed, but he wanted more, and so they had little entities that looked like Pikmin that were used as weapons, and then a player character got added in, then the villagers were scrapped, and then the characters all got downsized. This all transpired as Miyamoto was continuously inspired by the famous Mario 128 tech demo for the GameCube, where a bunch of Marios with their own AI ran around and carried things, showing its power for the N64, and just wanted more entities running around. But it was through all this trouble that the world of Pikmin was born, with a journey through a world and its strangely evolved flora and fauna, commanding the titular Pikmin to solve puzzles and defeat bosses, exploring this world piece by piece in a real-time strategy genre. And that's what's so special about this game, how weird it is. Of course, we start the story with Captain Olimar, a weird little alien called a Hocotation from planet Hocotate, flying in a spaceship who hits an asteroid that destroys his ship and sends him crashing down towards a strange planet. With only 30 days of life support, Olimar needs to gather up enough ship parts for the broken down SS Dolphin, with 30 total in order to escape. So with the stage set, I already really like this kind of setup. It's a fear I think we can all get behind, this idea of being stranded somewhere completely unfamiliar, like a deep wilderness with only quick thinking and survival skills at our side. And it's made especially more intimate with diary entries written at the end of each day Olimar makes it through, with mentions in it and a pawn collection of ship parts of his family back home waiting for him, with kids that he doesn't want to let down. It feels really different to Miyamoto's past works with the typical Mario formula, and definitely not as fantastical and epic as something like Zelda. The game sets up a struggle in nature with a slight blend of sci-fi and this familiarity of the lush wilderness and this sense of wonder only experienced as a kid when we first learn of all the weird animals and plants that nature has to offer. But it's all brought out in such a new, creepy, unsettling, curious way, each time you come across the weird peculiarities in this world, wondering about the next utterly horrifying creature and what strange evolution brought it to existence, and how it thrives in this environment, or what beautiful mystical landscape you might stumble across next. And all while allying with the Pikmin, who are admittedly rather adorable, at least in comparison to some other beasts here, to help in their plights as the underdog in the food chain. But this whole world is made even weirder, with the series next to confirming that this is indeed a post-human Earth called PNF 404. This is a bit different to say something like Splatoon, because instead of going in a philosophical route with its exploration of the idea of intelligence, as ridiculous as it sounds to say Splatoon does indeed do this, the Pikmin world instead explores this idea of life in general and how weird and scary and unknown it can be, and has Olimar at the center of it all for us to experience it with, as a sub-in for our more human perspective, caring about ideas like family so foreign to this planet. It's truly an endearing setup for this quirky little game. Oh, and you're also like 2 centimeters tall. It's really an experience seeing our world up this close. From this scale, everything is just enormous. It really gives a whole new perspective to the little pieces of beauty that could be in your garden outside that we just can't see, or at least see as intimately as this. But to get into the actual game, I should mention quickly that I'm talking about the Wii port of this game, the new Play Control release made to play with a Wii Remote, nunchuck, and its pointer controls, which I couldn't imagine going without, especially since starting with Pikmin 3 Deluxe with its use of these controls with the Joy-Cons. On landing, we start by figuring out what Pikmin actually do in this game's tutorial-like first area, the impact site. Here you start with one singular red Pikmin, characterized by the superior attack power and immunity to fire, and you start growing them by having them collect pellets. This can also be done with the corpses of your defeated enemies, which is rather sinister looking to be honest. You're also able to round up Pikmin doing any tasks, which are done by simply throwing them at something to interact with, by deploying a whistle to lure them back to your command, whether this be to replan a situation, abandon a task altogether, or save them from potential danger. So they bring their spoils back to the Onion, the weird reproductive haven for them that also shoots into space with the SS Dolphin at the end of the day to rest in orbit, with the 3 Pikmin types each having their own. You can have up to 100 Pikmin out on the field at once, and any extra grain will fill up the Onion storage. But up until there are 100 on the field, any new Pikmin made will be shot out of the Onion and sprout out of the ground around it, needing to be annoyingly plucked up one by one. I personally got so sick of doing this, but moving on, the impact site is just a tutorial area that you can come back to later to fight an extra boss and get a ship part. But the first real area with actual enemies is called the Forest of Hope, a far larger area where we first start to see all kinds of different aspects and interactions to the world you can either take on all at once with a huge army, or micromanage certain aspects of, like breaking down walls or carrying spoils, while you take a smaller crew around to do more involved tasks like defeating enemies. Leaving the side of the Dolphin and the Onions at the start of the day, you choose how many Pikmin and of what types you want to accompany you, and you set out to find some Dwarf Bulbobs first of all, a really basic enemy that are noted as a separate species to the nocturnal Spotty Bulbob as it's called in this game. Just one example of how interesting the wildlife is here, that somehow the Dwarf Bulbob, despite being a different species, looks exactly like a real Bulbob anyway. The basic Dwarf Bulbobs aren't all too much of a threat, but the big fella certainly is if you wake him up, able to chomp up Pikmin he manages to shake off should you fail to call them back in time. As we explore further, we start to realize the Pikmin AI is really fucking stupid in this game. Like, I'll just lose some as they trip over or get stuck behind a wall or something, or they just choose the stupidest route possible to bring things back to the ship. But we also come to discover bomb rocks, and the Pikmin who can carry them, yellow Pikmin, with the yellow Onion here that will relocate to the landing site the day after discovering it. Yellow Pikmin can also be thrown higher than other Pikmin, but ultimately I kind of found yellow Pikmin to be the worst type, preferring to need as little as possible of them to scrape on by for what they're required for, such as high ledges and bomb rocks, which aren't all too common occurrences. The bomb rocks themselves also scare the crap out of me too, because you might accidentally set one off near a wall as you yourself are near it, and then it blows up half your troops. As you start gathering more ship parts, taking on basic enemies, all that good stuff, we eventually come to this horrible spot where the boneheaded Pikmin AI usually just runs across the spot in a big clump and half of them fall off, so I just end up tossing them across. And it's here we get our first jump scare, the burrowing Snagrid, that can put up quite a fight, being the first real, I'd say, boss encounter of the game. They pop up out of the ground and pluck up nearby Pikmin, usually 3 at a time, just to hack them down, and they can become very annoying if not spaced properly away from them. Eventually I figured out the timing to these guys, where you just have to swarm their stupid heads by holding down on the D-pad right as they're about to burrow out of their hole. Once you figure out the timing, they go down really easily, but god, they're a nuisance until you figure that out. But with that, that's kind of the basics of the Forest of Hope down, and we move on to the hell that is the Forest Navel. If acid reflux were a place you could visit, the Forest Navel would definitely be it. It's a dim, dark, water-filled area with horribly violent surprises that can come out of nowhere and ruin your day. I started out coming across the blue Pikmin onion, which is definitely nice to have and adds the option of combat around water, which is certainly plentiful throughout this game. Unfortunately, they aren't as strong as red Pikmin, and I'll get to why that's annoying shortly, but it's certainly fun being able to explore these restricted areas, but with limitations. But oh, this area is already off to an annoying start because this little bread bug fella shows up and confused the crap out of me. You gotta love the positioning of the blue onion and ledge right over water, so I lose a bunch of Pikmin falling into it, and then even more as I finally figure out what the hell the bread bug does, which is steal your spoils. So as I'm trying to fight back once again, a ton of my Pikmin just die in the water. Forest Navel! But why bring all these non-blue Pikmin over to the area with a ton of water? Oh, well, maybe because I needed the bomb rocks there to clear out the heaps and heaps of stone walls blocking access to all the different parts of this area, otherwise making it an absolute chore to navigate anywhere, so breaking down these walls becomes absolutely priority. And needing to build your supply of blue Pikmin in this lower area on day 1 here is just so frustrating, man. But this isn't even the worst of the Forest Navel. Oh, and I should also mention that at the end of day, any Pikmin not currently under Olimar's command or back at the landing area will be killed by the predators around because they'll be left behind. I just thought I'd mention this because we get our first glimpse at this silly little frog guy. I wonder if he'll be a cool enemy once we encounter him. So as we progress through the Forest Navel, we continue to clear out the horrible routes this area needs us to use, and we move on down to the lower area to find a fiery blowhog, who kinda suck to be honest, so long as you keep your yellows and blues away and just swarm them with reds, who they can't do a single thing to because they only attack with fire. However, the fire everywhere, not just from these guys, but from literal fire geysers from the ground, do need to be dealt with. Otherwise, when collecting spoils, you might just randomly start seeing your Pikmin numbers drop as they stupidly walk into the fire and burn to smithereens. We start to make our way even lower down and start to find some stranger areas, and although this area is frustrating, it can be very atmospheric with the water along this sort of coastal looking area. But any residual joy you might have left is shattered as you encounter the Wollywog. What the hell is wrong with this thing? This is the single worst enemy ever created. In the Forest Navel in particular, 2 of them guard a ship part in the water, meaning only blue Pikmin can attack them. I'd now like to mention the concept of nectar, because nectar can increase Pikmin maturity and can be found all over the place. As a Pikmin reaches full maturity, it'll go from a leaf to a bud to a flower on its head, and then this in turn will increase running speed, working speed when carrying and doing any action really, and damage. This is important because since the Wollywogs are in water, you'll need a valiant effort to defeat them with just blue Pikmin. You could manage to bait them all the way to the shore and swarm these pieces of shit like a hate crime with 100 flowered reds, but sometimes that just isn't possible. But why are these beasts so horrible exactly? Because at first glance, they look like a regular enemy and are just as common as the rest of them, but upon launching to the skies while you're attacking it, it'll shake your Pikmin back to the ground and slam back down with what feels like 2 frames of opportunity to call your Pikmin back, otherwise they'll be squished in an instant. And it can do this so easily to so many Pikmin, and it even does it when it dies! The Forest Navel is a horrible place to try and build up a good supply of blue Pikmin because, as I mentioned before, the navigation back to the onion can be such a task, but when a Wollywog wiped out like half my troops, I had to just reset the day and go back and do something easier, like defeating the boss of the area, and then collecting the rest of these parts later. So, that's kind of the gist of the Forest Navel. I want to leave now, but honestly, it taught me a lot about better managing my Pikmin resources and not being too careless. But now for the distant spring. This is easily my favourite area because although yes there are Wollywogs here, I can kill them in their infant form as well while they're young and weak, basically spawn killing them. Don't look at me funny. Wouldn't you strangle baby Hitler? I can also bait them over to the shoreline far easier here and jump them with 100 red Pikmin. Anyway, the atmosphere of this area is very strange, but very mystical and mysterious. It's got the weirdest landscape yet, weird blocky shapes everywhere, weird patterns on the land and water, and not to mention this horrifying creature called the Smoky Prog. I thought I'd mention this guy first because he only spawns before day 16 if you can get here in time, which I did but didn't go over to his egg and wake him up. So I instead rewound time after I beat the game and killed him in his egg before he could even wake up. So I went back again and fought him, and he's kinda scary I guess, but the real benefit of beating him is that he provides a golden pearl to produce 100 Pikmin seeds. Anyway, other than him, there are some very annoying enemies in this area too, but it feels less obnoxious than the Forest Navel because the landing site is so much more accessible, not being atop an uphill climb. But the puffy blowhogs and swooping snitch bugs are certainly contenders for the biggest ruiners of my day. They just cause general mischief where the puffy blowhog just shoots my Pikmin all over the place, the snitch bug picks them up and throws them everywhere, needing me to pluck them back out of the ground again. I love being able to just latch onto him in the sky, pull him down to the ground, and swarm the absolute crap out of him. This area is certainly full of strange means to obtaining ship parts, micromanaging different colours all over the place to have the most efficient completion time for the game, bringing blues through the water and to knock down certain walls and build out of reach bridges, yellows to carry bombs, and reds to defeat the tougher enemies like the bull bears, who are basically just far stronger bulbs. As we move on, we get to this really strange area with a ship part at the top of it that I'm pretty sure I cheesed by throwing yellow Pikmins up like this, walking up to them and then tossing them further, but this spot was just plain weird and oddly designed to be honest. Later on we get another challenging situation, but probably not for the reasons you'd expect. Basically, you've got this ship part that's only accessible to the height of yellow Pikmin, so you gotta toss a ton of blue Pikmin across the water into a candy pop bud in order to convert them into yellows on the other side of the water. But this spot is awful because for some reason when I started plucking the yellows out, they just start killing themselves running into the water. Was I that bad a captain? Anyway, after defeating the armored cannon beetle, we just barely collect a bunch of parts in the same day. Never mind, we just barely collect a bunch of parts in the same day and move on to the final trial. The distant spring, however, was definitely valuable in figuring out your limits and micromanaging many different objectives and areas to visit at once, and pushes you to figure out creative problem-solving strategies to take charge of the area. Now the final trial is, as expected, a final test of strength putting what you've learnt to the test, laying out one last puzzle that uses all your Pikmin types before bringing you to the game's final boss. To start with, you want to get your blues to start on a bridge blocked by water, and your yellows to break down the stone wall. Then you want everyone building the huge bridge across the other side, and some reds to sit up over this fire geyser path. Then I realised I could call the reds over and around the other side of this wall once I was next to it, and then dismiss them to have them move the box to clear a path. And it's here you encounter Emperor Bulblax, essentially like a ruler of the Bulborbs and the holder of your final ship part, the Piggy Bank. And although not strictly necessary to achieve a good ending, collecting all 30 parts allows you to leave before the full 30 days are over and achieve the true ending. Bulblax is actually fairly straightforward when you get the hang of his attacks, but he's certainly got a lot of killing potential with his tongue sweeping attack and later his jumps all over the place. But if you set him up to swallow bomb rocks, kinda sacrificing some yellows in the process, he can be defeated fairly easily by charging him during his stun time, but you gotta get away before he slams down on all your Pikmin. But he's especially easy if you set up what's essentially a minefield for him. He's practically useless. And upon bringing the last part back to the SS Dolphin, that's it. That's the adventure of Pikmin. The true ending here sees Olimar sad to leave the Pikmin, but leaves his worries unfounded as the Pikmin now have a chance of defending themselves as they start attacking enemies on their own. It's quite a sweet ending. The bad ending is what's really creepy here though, as it sees Olimar on the 30th day try to leave without all the necessary ship parts to take off, crash back down, die, and then be revived in an onion as an Olimar Pikmin or some creepy shit like that, possibly stuck on PNF 404 forever. On that note, Pikmin is awesome. The Pikmin are awesome. You command them and strategize properly, you're devastated when you lose them, and you make an army of hundreds of these guys, new ones coming in to replace the last, to honor the last, and tear down that next boss. And although the game's time limit can definitely be scary, I think it adds a lot to this game that later sequels simply don't have. This idea of being as efficient as possible is something that the sequels do have due to the day system, making you return all your units back to the onion at the end of the day, but not to the extent of the first game with this impending threat. And I think that adds something special to this experimental, charming, and admittedly quite frustrating at times, first game in the series. By no means was I good at this game. I lost hundreds upon hundreds of Pikmin by the end of it, sometimes even all at once. But it was satisfying to make it through anyway, knowing that by the end I was achieving goals and forming strategies I couldn't have even conceived back at the Forest Navel, where I sent half my squad to drown in the tiny pools like small coughing infants. So no, my run wasn't perfect, But starting up Pikmin 2 for the first time, with its basic starting areas, I know I've come a long way since the days where I incinerated half my Pikmin unknowingly in the depths of the Forest Navel.